Hi, I'm Pauline and you're watching Pauline Interviews. We're doing part 3. I'm doing a series with Laurie McQuary, local psychic here in Lake Oswego, Oregon, and she has a business called Management by Intuition. In this segment we're gonna talk about some of Laurie's proudest moments. I know she has clients come in, but she also does work for free when it comes to missing people. She just gives her time and her talents to help. So I want to thank you for that, Laurie. That's so good of you. And it's also interesting because that's how you met your husband. I love that story.
And that is my favorite
and we talk
case.
about. Yeah.
Unfortunately, somebody had to die in order for us to meet. We've always been very aware of that and very respectful of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about the double-sided coin. It's a tragedy, and yet out of that, if I can make a difference, if I can help assist finding someone or laying literally to rest what has happened with the person, then I feel like I've done my good deed.
Well, you started your business back in 1983. How and when did you start working with detectives? I mean, how'd that come about?
You know, that's a good question, because I have people all the time email me, ask me, gee, I get feelings about cases all the time and I want to tell a detective, what should I do? In fact, I have a lady here locally who, and I know quite well, who has been really bothered with a case we've had here, and she's wanted to just walk in the police station downtown and say, here it is, and I've said, don't do it.
Is she a psychic?
She's psychic. She's not a practicing psychic. She does other things. But you have to remember that we were talking earlier about this being very acceptable work. In some ways it is, and in many ways it's not, and I don't blame some of law enforcement for going, oh my God, here comes another one of those.
Yeah.
Because well-meaning people wanting to share that, but presenting it irresponsibly.
Mm-hmm.
So my case in particular, I was fortunate because I had a client whose husband was a detective. And she and I became friends after her being a client, and we would talk about cases, and then she would start telling her husband what I said. So after a while, I got an invitation to go down to the police station and ride around with him on a couple of cases, and I gave him insights to what I thought. It just began to build from there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became acquainted with somebody whose brother was a detective and came into it that way. If you're meant to, and I mean this just in the way it sounds, if it's a fateful kind of thing, if you're meant to work with law enforcement on these kind of things, the situation will find you. Just don't go down to the police station carrying this information in a big bag and presenting yourself that way. The more credible you look, the more I think people will probably, and by credible I mean normal, just, it's a hard road to go. And the way I met my husband through the case was, of course, the case itself. And it was the victim's family who contacted me.
Was your husband, well, when you met him, he wasn't your husband, but how did he feel about working with a psychic?
Well, it didn't get off a beginning very well, let's put it that way. And it wasn't, I don't believe, that he was just against psychics, but, you know, police have to look at things pretty black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And I cover
different
a lot
approach.
of, well, I cover the gray areas.
Yeah.
And they become black and white eventually. But no, when I first made an appointment to see him, he called me, actually, he made the appointment. And he said something to the fact of, well, I'd like to take you to lunch and check you out. That was not the right
Check you out,
way
was it?
to present it.
No.
And I got a little bit testy with him, and it all turned out well. And we did go to lunch, and we exchanged some great information, and a year and a half later, why, we were married.
Now, as much as you help the detectives, they're the ones that solve the case.
They solved the case, and I
Yeah.
always say that. I used to just get absolutely irate when I'd see some psychics in the news, and there was one in particular back east who would get off the airplane wherever she was going to do the case and say, well, I'm here to solve the case. Wrong approach. You want to be on everybody's good side that you can, in particular if you're coming in a questionable profession.
How do you receive this information?
Quickly.
Quickly.
I mean, I don't even have to think about it.
Okay.
When I
Does
get
it come in pictures or voices?
I get imageries, no, I don't hear voices, God, please, let's not go
Yeah,
there,
okay.
then I'll really have problems. No, I hear my own voice talking, but
Yeah.
I get an immediate response, immediate. Like for instance, if somebody brings me a picture of someone that's missing, and they say, do you think this person's dead or alive? I know it immediately.
Immediately.
Very, very, very seldom have I been wrong about it.
How do you
about
handle that? That's gotta be hard, like.
Well, it's not mine.
Yeah.
And I take cues from working with the police. And I'm not a person who compartmentalizes easily, believe me, I don't. But when it comes to cases, or even people coming in to see me, if you come in as a client and you have great problems, I'm sorry for you, let's talk about it, but it's your problem, it's
Right.
not mine.
Yeah.
The person who comes to me about the missing person or the dead individual, I feel bad about the circumstances, but I can't do my job if I'm all embroiled with the grief of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah,
like going
that
back
makes
to the
sense.
nursing days.
Yeah.
I can't give you a shot if I'm crying,
Yeah.
because I feel bad, I hurt you.
Right.
You're getting the shot because it's going to save your life.
You're doing, yes, you're doing what, yeah, and people wanna know, I mean, it's terrible,
Oh, they do.
they do wanna know.
And people will come even after a case is solved, and they will go, you know, can you tell us at all what, you know, our loved one thinks or about it? I mean, you know, I can give that information.
Thinks about it, you mean, after
Yes.
they crossed over?
Yeah, of course.
Well,
Or
then
about
that's-
the case.
Oh, well, then that's comforting, that's
It
comforting,
is, it's
yeah.
comforting to people.
Mhm.
And like I said, I don't go into that full time, but I'm happy to do it if I can.
Will you tell the client the person is dead, or will you pass the information to the detectives so that they can handle it?
If the family contacts me, oh no,
Mhm.
I'll tell the detective
Oh.
what I feel.
Yeah.
But when I'm only working with family members first,
Oh.
my first intuition is to always say, what do you think? What are you feeling?
Oh.
And I will not take a case if I disagree with the family on what the person is dead or alive. There's no point.
Right, so if the family says, no, they're alive, I know they are, they're somewhere, and you know for sure they're passed on, you won't.
I did a case up out of Bellingham, Washington many
Mhm.
years ago of a young man who had disappeared. He was in his 20s. Family of nice Filipino people who had moved here during World War II. And the family contacted me as a result of me being on Seattle television. And the sister called, and this was days before email and all that, and she said, we know he's alive. I said, how do you know he's alive? She said, people have seen him all around Bellingham. Bellingham is small.
Yes.
And I said, well, Cheryl, I don't think he's alive. And I said, if we're starting a case together like this, then it's going to be counterproductive for me to come from one direction as opposed to the other. She went back to the family, talked to them, called me back. She said, where do you think he is? And I told her. She had faxed me a map of the area of a park not far from them. I requested. She found him. She went to the park and found him.
Oh.
And I have remained good friends with this family
Uh-huh.
for years.
Mhm.
And it was so hard. It's very hard to tell
Mhm.
people, I think your loved one's gone.
But it's probably better than hoping for years and then.
Well, it led to
not
them
knowing.
at least being open enough to say, well, let's at least go look in the park.
Yeah.
And searchers had looked in that park with dogs and missed him.
Wow.
So it was a very, very sad case. But
Mhm.
you're right. I would rather give them what I think. And,
Mhm.
you know, you take it on the chin sometimes if you're
Yeah.
wrong. And you
Yeah.
can be wrong.
You can be. That leads me to ask you, I'm glad you said that. It's hard to be accurate 100% of the time because
You can't be.
you're interpreting, and
That's
your
right.
interpretations what are some other factors that either, you know, help you get close to the answer or get in the way of getting the accurate information? What I'm saying is, what are the things you're dealing with to make you accurate or less than accurate, or
I can't think of what would make me more accurate other than practice.
and interpreting maybe
And
better?
knowing the interpretation
Yeah.
and the signs I get personally. And what has always been, you know, difficult is if indeed I'm dealing with people that disagree, and sometimes they have, sometimes I've dealt with detectives that say, well, I'm only here because the family wants me here. Great, we're off to a good start. And I don't ever try to be argumentative, but I just, if I get a sense or a hit, as I call it, about a situation, I'm not going to back down because that person disagrees. They could be right, maybe I am wrong. So when people ask me, well, what's your percentage rate? I don't think of it as a percentage because I don't keep track of it that way, but I do know I have been right oftener than I have been wrong.
Now, when you see, okay, since I haven't developed my abilities, I know that some psychics say they see symbols and then they have to interpret them, but you don't, you see pictures.
I see pretty much pictures.
So that's easier to interpret than a symbol.
It is, although sometimes I still get symbologies.
Oh, you do? Can you give me an example?
Well, I was asked at one point in time to go out to a police headquarters here locally for a missing man. And I said, all I want is his picture, and they said, well, we just did an autopsy. Will that do? I said, fine, give me the autopsy. So I was looking at autopsy pictures and that sort of thing, and I kept seeing a mule.
Wow.
And I said, what is a mule? Well, now I know. This guy was into carrying drugs for other people.
Oh, he was a mule.
He was the mule.
Oh,
and this
that
was
is
years
symbolic.
ago. Today
That
I
is
think I
symbolic.
would get it a lot
Yeah,
clearer than that, but
yeah.
that's a good example.
Yeah, of a
And
symbol.
of course the detectives just kind of laughed when I said, did he have a mule? What's a mule? They didn't even know who he was. That was the
Yeah.
problem. He was, you know, a person they hadn't identified. They'd found him in the river. So
It's a good thing you were a nurse, because like a normal, I'm not saying you're not normal.
Yeah.
I don't have the background. If I would, I couldn't have looked at somebody.
Yeah.
But you've seen a lot, so
Yeah, no,
I think
that
the
doesn't
nursing
bother
helped
me.
you. Nursing probably
well,
helped you.
it was
You-
probably my precursor to getting into this
Yeah,
work.
right, because you have compassion, you care about people, but yet you can protect yourself. Yes, let's talk about that. As a psychic, how do you protect yourself?
Well, I do what I call, what we were just talking about, the filtering, trying to compartmentalize. Sometimes I do take sad things home with me. You can't help it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm married to somebody who's pretty solid and gives me good feedback on things. And, you know, even when he was working, we rarely sat and talked cases together unless there was something that each one of us wanted to help the other with. But he always did his own cases. And if I had questions, I could bring them home. But I leave stuff pretty much outside the house.
Now, I know you're a spiritual person too, so that probably helps to know that we're not just our bodies, and that there's more to life than what we see.
Exactly.
And especially since you can see beyond the five senses, which really helps. Now, you also do other work that I think, I don't know if you still do it, but you used to do cleaning or clearing of...
I do clearing of residences. We call them hauntings, I guess, or
yeah.
ghost happenings. And I always find them to be pretty mundane. They're not weird stuff.
Have you ever had a bad experience?
Only in my own house.
I remember that, that's why I asked.
No, in fact, the last one I did was about 3-4 years ago, and it was a woman, and the family knew. The guy had remarried, the wife had died, and it was all sad. There was a bunch of kids, and they called, the new wife and the husband called and said, we know there's something going on, because pictures were falling off walls and this, that, and the other thing. So I came out, and I didn't know any of this story before I came. I don't want any prior knowledge. I just come out and give them a read. And I told them there was a photograph of this woman in one of the rooms, and I said, it's her. She's here. And I didn't know it was a wife who had died. I just said, she's a member of the family, and she's upset about this, that, and the other. And I just talked to her.
Told her to move on?
Well, I told her it was okay to stay as long as she didn't interfere. And she had been a very loving, very strong, controlling woman, and so here comes this interloper into her life. And you know what? It calmed. It was fine after that. So it's usually just plain old reasons. It's not weird kind of stuff. And I don't know if I'd want to get into that.
Yeah.
You know, I read cases nationally in the news. There was one in San Diego here a couple of years ago that I'd be fascinated to get on a plane and go down and visit the house where it happened, because it's unsolved.
Oh.
Unsolved.
Bad
And
things happening or just weird
bad.
things? Oh yeah,
No,
bad
this
scare
was-
me. I mean, mischievous is like that lady,
Exactly.
you know, but bad
No,
scary.
the heavy duty stuff, and especially if you go in there and spend a lot of time, you know, you might bring some of that residue home. I don't know. Some of that stuff you just don't want to get into.
Yeah.
But it still is fascinating, so I read all the books about it.
Yeah, I do too. It scares the heck out of me, but I still read that.
Well, I think it's scarier what's on this side of the curtain than
Than
there
on the
is
other
what
side,
on the other.
yeah.
I'm more worried about the physical people doing bad things.
That's true. Now, I'm interested though, when you told her she can stay as long as, you know, she keeps, you know.
She doesn't interfere.
But isn't it important for people who've left the, you know, their physical body to cross over? Don't they get stuck?
People can get earthbound is what it's
Yeah,
called.
that's not a good thing, is it?
Well, no. You're supposed to move on. You know,
Yeah.
you come back and check in, but you
Yeah.
know, I just think people can get stuck because of situations. Sometimes it's the grieving people they leave behind that, you know, you can only imagine your person is still trying to get on the other side and you keep calling.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
there's reasonableness, you know, grief takes as long as it takes, it's not easy, but if you're grieving way beyond a couple of years, I'd say go get some help.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing your loved one any good.
Yeah, my mother told me something one time about it. The person that crossed over talked to a psychic or something, tell them to stop grieving, I can't
Exactly, you
leave.
keep calling.
Yeah, keep calling. What are some of your really proud moments, like somebody you've really helped? You mentioned some young people that later on they followed your advice in their career. Is there anything you can think of that you're really, besides finding missing people?
Besides cases?
Yeah, cases.
You know, I don't have feedback every single day.
Yeah.
But when I do, and I get particularly delighted when somebody, and it's been a lot of it in the last several years, people who go, God, I've seen you 20 years ago, and everything you talked about has come to, you know, fruition, and you helped me a lot, and I'd like to see you again. Of course, it reminds me how old I'm getting. That was 20 years ago.
I interviewed you 20 years
Yes.
ago, in 1993.
But, you know, when I get ongoing sort of revenue about people and their lives turning around, because maybe they listened to what I said, not that I had all the answers, I'm just giving them the information. I have a lot of those, and I'm always happy about them, always.
Yeah, sometimes when you give somebody information and they go home, they go, well, that's not really.
And they do the opposite.
Yeah.
And then they call me to tell me.
Yeah.
I married him anyway.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
10 years ago, where you were right, I shouldn't have. I mean,
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, that they find out a few years later that what you said was correct. But, you know, they're like, even one of the interviews we did, you said something about, you'd say something, was a George in your life? And they go, no, I can think George.
Not yet.
And then they remember it's their dad's name or something like that.
or it's a future name.
Oh.
We have friends on another state that the fellow was single, and he called a couple of 3 years ago, and he said he'd met this lady, and he said, it's just really weird, but she knows you. And she said, you read for her 22 years ago, and you gave her my first name then, and she didn't know anybody by that name at that time.
Wow. Did you know it was in the future? Could you tell if it was?
I just gave her the
The
name.
name just comes to you. It's, not past.
Sometimes it's just a name.
Well,
but
is it because the spiritual realm, there is no time?
There's no time.
There's no time. So
We
that's,
have it to keep track.
Yes.
There's no time.
So that's also is where the misinterpretation may come in. Yeah.
Well, and the expectation.
Yeah.
You know, people
Yeah.
get pretty wound up about predictions if they don't happen right at midnight on the 16th of October.
Right.
And I just always tell them, well, sometimes we have to wait it out. Sometimes
Yeah.
predictions are exactly a year off, and I don't know why.
Well, because
But a lot of psychics agree with me,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
say that.
now when you said when somebody comes in, you don't want to know anything about them. Why is that?
Because I don't want it tainted. And particular, I want to do my job.
Okay.
And I would rather, and I do say to people, don't say anything for at least the first 15, 20 minutes. Let me read you. I want you to feel that I've been reading your mail. That's exactly how I put it. And, you know, it's not a disclaimer, but if the few times it's happened, if it isn't going well, I'll stop it and say, you know, we're 15 minutes into this and you don't seem to be very receptive. Do you want to go on? But that so rarely happens.
Yeah, mostly they do, yeah. I mean, because I could see where in your business somebody would come to you and in their mind they're thinking, Leah, I want to prove to me you can.
Well, they do, and I like it when I do.
Yeah, yeah. So I imagine you've made a lot of friends over the years and it's been very satisfying.
I've made a lot of good acquaintances, which brings up a subject that, you know, I should probably just touch on. People will say, gee, it must be hard being friends with you because you know everything. That's why I don't want a lot of close friends, because I don't want to know when stuff's going to be happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's been taken to the nth degree. So I have lots of acquaintances, but I only have one or two people besides my husband who I'm that close with.
This is what I want to end with. I wanted to ask you, are you happy the way your life turned out? Are you glad that when you were 18 years old you fell on your... Are you glad? I mean...
Hard way to get in touch with your
Yeah.
intuition. It's easier now. Of course I am.
Yeah.
You know, it's my life. I signed up for it. I believe in past lives. I believe we come around again. I think we accept and agree to whatever our lives are going to be. I think we do have will. You know, we can say no to situations, or we can say yes.
Right.
Mine took a pretty long, circuitous route for a long time, but I am never, never, never sorry that I chose this.
And I think it's interesting how different people's psychic abilities open up. Like if I want to develop mine, I don't necessarily have to have an accident. I can.
No, you do not.
Yeah, I can work on it. And you teach workshops and things like
I
that.
do. I've done those for years and years, and I love doing them because I love to help people uncover their own abilities. If for no other reason, you know, not everybody wants to hang out a shingle that says psychic, but for just understanding your own life and making better decisions.
So a lot of people can act as their own psychic.
Sure they can.
Yeah, and I'm sure you as a psychic would recommend that too, even though, you know, may take away business. I mean,
Well,
you're willing to help people
Even
move on.
people who come in and say, you know, I've had this feeling about such and such, I just want confirmation on it,
Mhm.
great.
That's
I'd
always
like
good to
do
have.
But, you know, I always encourage people to develop their own.
Laurie, thank you for your time,
Thank
and I
you.
hope we can do a lot more interviews.
We can.
Thank you for watching, Pauline, interviews, and I've been interviewing my good friend and local psychic, Laurie McQuary, here in Lake Oswego, Oregon. Management by Intuition is her business. Thank you.